So my name is Erica Figuereto, and I'm the Director of Chaplaincy for the U of T, Scarborough, and Centennial College Chaplaincies. I work with two lovely people who are also in the chat. They are Alex Lehoy, so she's in the chat. She's our campus minister for both both the chaplaincies that I said, and our chaplain for both of those ministries is Father Hansu Park, and he's also the pastor of St. Barnabas. So I just want to welcome all of the people that are attending this talk. I'm assuming that you found out about it through various ways. It could have been through St. Barnabas, could have been through our chaplaincy social media, through the young adults group at St. Barnabas, or through St. Joseph the Worker Parish in Oshawa. So regardless of how you found out about us, we want to welcome you for being here, and we hope you're excited about the topic for tonight, just like we are. This topic is the last topic of 8 talks in what we call our Relevance series. It's a series that our chaplaincy hosts where we try to bring you topics that are relevant to your Catholic faith. And these are public lectures open to everyone, not just university and college students. So this talk, as you no doubt read when you registered, is called The Reality of Relativism. And we're hoping to be able to bring to you this topic, which is on the one hand a philosophical topic, but it presents us with a worldview that is very predominant in our culture today, and it is definitely one that we should have an insight into so that we can understand just how much it pervades society, culture, the media, and various other aspects. I will just give you a brief introduction on our speaker tonight. In some ways, I'm sure if you heard about it from him, he needs no introduction, but his name is Father Eric Ma. And a little bit about Father Eric. He is a priest for the Archdiocese of Toronto in Canada. He's currently serving as the pastor of St. Joseph the Worker, and he's the priest chaplain at another university chaplaincy. It's UOIT, I think it's now called Ontario Tech, Durham College, and Trent. So 3 campuses. He previously served in the capacity of associate pastor at St. Leonard's Parish in Brampton and Blessed Trinity Parish in North York. Prior to entering the seminary, Father Eric attended the University of British Columbia, where he obtained a BA in English literature. He also graduated from Dalhousie University with a law degree in 2002 before moving to Toronto and being called to the bar in 2003. He practiced insurance law on a full-time basis before entering St. Augustine Seminary in 2005. And Father Eric also has a podcast, which some of you may know about through social media. It's called the Catholic Latte podcast, and you can find it on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. You can watch previous or current episodes of the podcast on Instagram, and an episode of Catholic Latte is broadcasted every Monday at 6:30 p.m. on Shalom World, which you can watch through their website or through any smart TV. And I can definitely share links to Father Eric's podcast to tune into those for more information. So that being said, I would like to give a very warm virtual welcome to Father Eric Ma, and he will lead us into this topic, the reality of relativism.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks, Erica and Father Hansu, for inviting me to do this talk. I didn't realize I was the closer this year, so it's very exciting. I guess we'll begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death, amen. St. Joseph, pray for us. And St. Barnabas, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, so just as a bit of housekeeping, I always tell people at the beginning of these talks, don't think of it like you have an exam coming out, because you don't, So just relax and just kind of pay attention to what strikes your heart. There's a lot to cover today, but even you shouldn't be intimidated by that. Like basically, we're trying to have fun in a certain sense, and so note this talk is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to the podcast, so you can kind of watch at your leisure later on. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or memorizing a whole bunch of stuff. Just again, pay attention to how things strike your heart in a moment, and we'll kind of go from there. Because with all these things, the Holy Spirit is obviously the main protagonist and the great teacher, so we want to pay attention to that. As sort of a background to the topic of relativism, just this idea of knowing the signs of the times and kind of being appreciative of what are the underlying philosophies that are kind of dictating modern culture, right? Like whether we're talking about minimalism or hedonism or relativism, if you will, things like that, right? So a lot of times when it comes to engaging with individuals or groups or organizations within modern society, just to kind of like break it down, like, okay, like what is actually the underlying philosophy behind what they are doing, what they're saying, the choices that they're making in life. And if you're able to process those things in a really smart and systematic sort of way in your own mind, preceding dialogue, that can be a really helpful thing. So as Erica mentioned, like I used to be a lawyer, and this is something that they used to teach us all the time in law school. So they would always say to us, like, in terms of like specifics, you might not be able to remember the specifics of what we taught you during the 3 years of law school or whatnot, but hopefully by the end of the 3 years, you know how to think like a lawyer. And part of the training of being a lawyer is just kind of learning how to recognize relevant issues with regards to a situation that comes up. So in the early going, what might happen is like you're in a situation or you're having a conversation with someone, and it seems to be like, okay, the only relevant issue or area of concern is like this thing or that thing. But then as you become more seasoned and you get more experience, you realize like something can be simple in the face of it, but actually there are like 20 relevant issues you need to address in a really deliberate sort of way. So a similar thing with relativism. So I'm sure everyone has heard of the concept of relativism before. People might know some common objections to relativism and how to engage with it, again, in an intelligent sort of way. But hopefully by the end of this talk, you realize that there's a lot more kind of to it, and you'll be better equipped, if you will, to dialogue with people about the particular subject, even if they don't realize that that's the philosophy that they're working under. So, okay, so right off the bat, just to make sure we're on the same page. What is relativism, right? So relativism, kind of in a nutshell, it's a philosophy which denies the reality of objective reality, right? So there's no objective true or false, right or wrong. There's only my opinion or my subjective perspective on things, right? So even if people, again, don't explicitly name the philosophy of relativism, it comes up in different ways. So people say like, don't judge me, or I do what I feel like, I do what feels good. What's true for you might not be true for me. Don't impose your views upon me, or everything is reducible to personal opinion. So again, with all those different instances, whenever people say some variation of that, they are actually advocating the principle or the philosophy of relativism, whether or not they're actually conscious of that particular term. Now, in terms of like further breaking that down, you can further break down the concept of relativism to 4 different types, if you will. So I'm just going to take my time with this. So first of all, metaphysical relativism, right? So metaphysics is a study of like reality or being, So right away, you can tell that relativism has a problem with that, right? So metaphysical relativism is a belief that there's no absolutes with regards to reality or being, right? Because like there is no reality, there is no ultimate being, right? It's just like, what I perceive, if you will, right? So the difficulty with that is that if there's no sense of metaphysics, then you don't have a sense of the true or the good or the beautiful. And if you think it through, you don't have the sense of the reality of God, right? So if you believe in metaphysical relativism, it kind of feeds into religious relativism, which we'll talk about kind of later on. Epistemological relativism, it means there's no absolutes, no belief in absolutes with regards to knowledge, right? So epistemology is a study of knowledge, right? So, similar things. So we believe that there's nothing you can really kind of know for sure. There's only like my perspective, my perception of how things are. Religious relativism, probably in a certain sense, one of our central concerns today. No absolutes with regards to religion or faith, right? So, for example, in the words of Father John Ricardo, Jesus is not like the way, the truth, the life. He's simply a way, in the way that Buddha's a way, or like every other kind of denomination or different religious perspective is a way. And there's kind of this perspective that all are equally legitimate in a certain sense, right? Moral relativism is this idea of no absolutes with regards to, obviously, morality. So there's not this sense of right or wrong, good or bad. There's not a sense of those things with regards to application across the board, applying to everyone. Again, it's just like personal opinion, personal perspective. So the thing I want you to kind of capture there, quite apart from the terminology, is just kind of the flavor of it, right? So it's kind of like there's, again, no right or wrong, no true or false. There's just kind of like, what you think, what I think, impinging upon all these different areas of life, metaphysics, epistemology, religion, and morality. Now, I want to lead from that, once we've kind of defined that kind of opening term or opening concept of relativism, to feed into like the difficulties with regards to the philosophy of relativism. And the difficulties are diverse, and there are a lot of difficulties. So the first thing that comes to mind is this idea that the philosophy of relativism drains life of meaning and purpose. So relativism drains life of meaning and purpose, which is no small thing. And so it's one of these things, sometimes when we advocate against relativism, it seems to be an imposition upon one's deep longing for happiness and freedom and everything that kind of entails, right? But if you think about it, like a lot of us, all of us, we are searching for meaning. So one way to kind of put it is like, okay, well, if you say to someone, like, do you believe in relativism? Yeah, I believe in relativism. Okay, fine, right? But if someone is posed the same question in a different way, do you believe your life has no meaning? Do you believe you have no purpose? People get their backs up about that, right? There's a reason why discernment and everything that entails, like God's will and whatever, like those are the most kind of pressing concerns, especially for young people, right? Because people believe fundamentally that my life has purpose, my life has meaning. And the thing to realize is that if you believe in relativism, it kind of like deflates that particular notion that your life does have purpose and your life does have meaning. So as a bit of background, like we talked about those different types of relativism, it's kind of interesting. People are selective with regards to their relativism. So people aren't relativists typically across the board, right? So for example, a lot of people would not say 2 + 2 = 4 because the majority consensus is that's the case. They would say like, well, that's true, right? Because we believe in the validity of science or mathematics. So there's truth in science, there's truth in mathematics. A lot of people would believe that, right? But on the other hand, they would be relatives with regards to morality and with regards to religion. Now, again, the difficulties that when it comes to science and math, it's like a different area of expertise, right? So the scientific method is certainly a really good thing. Science has its place, math has its place. But at the same time, in terms of answering questions with regards to purpose and meaning, in a certain sense, you could think about it, those questions can only be answered by theology and philosophy. They can't be answered by science or math. It's sort of a different area of, or different scope of expertise, if you will, right? So to break it down even further, right? So we talked about at the outset about underlying philosophy is kind of undergirding the culture. You got to realize that whether or not people have explicitly taken philosophy or theology, everyone has a philosophy. Right? Philosophy is just simply love of wisdom, right? So whether or not your philosophy is articulated even explicitly, whether or not it actually hangs together in a rational sort of way, everyone has a philosophy by which they live. Again, Father John Ricardo, I quote him a lot, he's a priest in the United States. He talks about this a lot where he says, for example, your philosophy might be, he who dies with the most toys wins, right? So again, it sounds stupid when you hear it, right? But a lot of people live according to that philosophy. So if I die with a lot of stuff in my possession, then yeah, like I win. That's the goal of life. But you think it through for a second, it's like, well, no, it just means you're dead, right? And you left stuff behind, right? Another philosophy that comes up a lot is, living for the weekends. And again, when you hear it out loud, it sounds stupid. Like, what's the philosophy by which you live? I live for the weekend, right? But a lot of people, they do that. So what am I doing over the course of the week? I'm just trying to get through the week. I'm not trying to accomplish a particular thing. I'm just trying to perhaps minimize pain and inconvenience, maximum pleasure, maximum reward with minimum inconvenience. I get through the week. I get to the weekend. I take a breath. I enjoy the weekend. I go for a beer with my buddies or whatever you like to do, and then rinse and repeat. So living for the weekend. But the idea there is that, okay, in the absence of this idea of meaning and purpose behind one's life, all you have are philosophies like that, where I'm simply trying to get through life. Minimum inconvenience, minimum pain, maximum pleasure, however you want to frame it, right? And so that's a thing you want to pay attention to right off the bat. So it's a really good strategy just to be aware of, just in general, right? So when you're debating people with regards to philosophy or morality or religion, to not simply present arguments which show how their position it doesn't hold, but to kind of show them that, like, okay, the opposing position actually feeds into what you really want. And there's a reason why the Lord always, when he talks to people, he always begins not with the demands of their moral life, but some variation of, what do you want? And what are you looking for? Where are you hurting? What can I do for you, right? So when you're talking to relativists, in the back of your mind, whether or not you say it explicitly, to kind of pitch it some idea of like, okay, I know this person is a human being, and therefore they have this infinite longing for God, whether they realize it or not. And what flows from that is this desire to kind of live according to the reality that my life does matter. My life has meaning, my life has purpose. And again, like how you move forward based on that, it depends on the circumstance and the person you're dealing with. But to kind of lead people to where they ultimately want to go, that's a really good starting point when you're trying to, like, argue the point, if you will. Okay. Now, the second difficulty with relativism is that morality is reduced to personal preference. So we've touched on this before, again, kind of earlier in talk. So in the absence of this notion of like true or false, right or wrong, all I have is like, I want to do this, or I feel like doing that. And that's problematic, So a couple examples come to mind. Like I remember when I was teaching RCA back in my first parish, you teach the class for a couple sessions and whatnot, and then later on you bring the people in for like maybe a private like test, if you will. It's not really a test, but it's just kind of a check-in point, And so I remember talking to people and saying like, okay, well, how do you know that God exists? And as a general rule of thumb, when it comes to answering any questions with regards to the Catholic faith, like there is a right answer, right? So if you're fumbling and you're doing sort of the buckshot approach where I'm just gonna, like, you're in school and you have like open-ended answers and you're kind of writing, hoping that something sticks, like you probably don't know the answer, right? So I would ask these people like, okay, how do you know that God exists? And the answer I'm looking for is reason, observation, and revelation. Like that's the answer, right? So reason, observation, and revelation. But more to the point, how people would typically answer is, well, I think God exists because I feel this thing in my heart and whatever. It's like, oh no, it's relativism, right? So yeah, this idea that like I believe something is right because of what I want or because of what I feel. Like I'll give you another example. Like this happens a lot when it comes to talking to people about morality in the confessional or in the office, right? Where someone will say like, well, I made this choice because I felt like it wasn't wrong, or I didn't do this other thing because I was afraid that I was wrong, so I didn't do it, right? But it's kind of interesting, like people can make errors on both sides of the spectrum. And all priests know it with regards to the people of God. So someone could be really worked up about something that really doesn't matter. And so, for example, when you see a good spiritual director, he or she should be able to say to you, like, okay, of all the things you mentioned, don't worry about this, don't worry about that, don't worry about the other thing, right? On the other hand, there are situations, obviously, where people are not concerned about a lot of things, in which case the response is like, actually, you really should do this. You really should focus on that. Like you have a blind spot with regards to this really serious thing you should work on with regards to your relationship with God, the moral life, or however you want to frame it, right? But the point is like, you can't just defer to how you feel. Like the rightness or wrongness of the thing is independent of your subjective experience, right? But you can appreciate how a lot of even well-intentioned Catholics, they live and die based on that mountain. So like, what am I looking for in terms of the Catholic experience? Like the religious highs, or I'm crushed when I'm in moments of spiritual desolation. Whereas the sweet spot is like the steadiness of love, right? So I'm not too high, I'm not too low. And so it's something like the marriage vows, right? For better, for worse, for richer or poorer, right? So some days are going to be like, upbeat, and some days are going to be kind of rough, right? But if I have this steadiness of heart, which is not a relativistic heart, and I'm not living and dying based on like my feelings or my subjective experience, but on principle and truth, then you can have that steadiness that perseveres in the midst of the fiercest of storms, right? And that's the thing to keep at the back of your mind as well, right? So we're framing all these things in terms of like, what do you really want, your deepest desires and whatnot. To realize that the peace that Christ wants to give to you is the peace that persists in the midst of storms, right? And this is what we're talking about. So if I live my life based on truth and principle and what is actually the case, as opposed to, the ebb and flow of how I feel, again, my subjective experience, you can imagine even in theory that helps you to live with a greater sense of integrity and consistency throughout the course of your life on a daily basis. Okay. Now, the third difficulty with regards to relativism, this is coined by Dr. Peter Kreeft, the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny of the majority. And this is something that should just make sense. You just think about it logically, right? if I don't make decisions based on reason and the use of the intellect, which is accessible to everyone, right? Everyone has reason, everyone has intellect, and so we can, in theory, engage with each other based on those two things. In the absence of the recourse to reason and intellect, what do you have, right? You have the subjective experience thing we just talked about, but you also have this thing called, again, the tyranny of the majority, right? So something is right simply because a bunch of us think that it's right. But you think about that, like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so the example that always comes to mind, there's this director named Danny Boyle. He directed, I think he directed a bunch of zombie movies, but also he directed, was it Slumdog Millionaire, and this sci-fi movie called Sunshine. And Sunshine is a movie which not a lot of people have seen, but it's actually pretty good. But basically, it's about these scientists or astronauts. They're about to go to the sun to restart it because it's somehow like diminishing in terms of its heat and whatever. And so they're in this spaceship called Icarus 2. And the reason why it's called Icarus 2 is because the first mission was based on a spaceship called Icarus 1. And so Icarus 2, it's progressing from Earth to the sun. And all of a sudden they notice, like, oh my gosh, there's like Icarus 1 just kind of floating here in space. And then they got to make a decision, like, do we continue on with our mission to the sun? Or do we kind of go to Icarus 1, see if there's survivors, maybe like refuel, recamp, this sort of thing, and then continue on with their mission, right? And this is the point, right? So initially when they're talking about it, one person is like, okay, let's like take a vote, or like let's draw straws or something. But another person says, well, no, that's stupid. Like, we're scientists, right? We're scientists. So like, let's think the issue through. Again, use our reason, use our intellect to discover what is the right thing to do in this particular circumstance, right? And so the idea is that, like, that's good process. That's good process. It's something we talk about internally here at the parish, you know, like sometimes we want to just kind of make quick conclusions and take quick action because it gives the illusion of efficiency. But you don't want to be like St. Peter, like fishing all night and catching nothing. You want to wait for the Lord to kind of say, in a certain sense, okay, like fish on this side of the boat at this particular time, at which point your productivity goes through the roof, right? So it's really important that you have this intention of discovering the truth and acting in accordance with that, right? So how that works out, practically speaking, is to have good process. Sometimes there's situations where you just got to make a quick decision on the fly, but if it's possible and the circumstances are appropriate, what you should do is like take the time to apply your reason and your intellect to a particular situation in a systematic sort of way, get people's input and this sort of thing, and then like you discover, okay, this is the truth to which we're called to correspond. It's a much more satisfying way of going about life and just like, you know, moving things forward. Okay. Third difficulty, it kind of inhibits freedom of speech. Relativism inhibits freedom of speech. So just to think it through, right? So if people can't make the distinction, for example, of like, I am critical of your sins as opposed to like you as a person, then it would seem to be that whenever you're critical of someone's moral behavior, it's simply reducible to hate speech. And so therefore I can't criticize you at all with regards to your moral choices in life, because it seems like if I criticize your behavior, I'm hating you. And obviously that's problematic, right? It prevents us from having nuanced and helpful conversations to help move the situation forward, right? So the example that comes to mind, this is kind of this might take a little while, but this past weekend, so it was like John chapter 20, the story of the Apostle Thomas, right? And so you remember Thomas, right? Like the first time that the Lord appears to the disciples, Thomas is not with them, right? And then later on, obviously Thomas is with them, you know, Thomas, see the mark of the nails, put your finger in this mark and hand it to my side, and it goes on from there, right? But the thing I want you to kind of notice with regards to this particular story, and I talked about this to the parishes, with the parish this past weekend, like part of the reason why Thomas is unable to receive the truth of what the disciples tell him in the aftermath of that first encounter with the Lord is because he's hurting really, really bad. Now it's understandable, right? So like you think about the long-awaited Messiah, like everyone's hopes and dreams in terms of the Israelite people, the people of God, like everything, like they bet the farm in the sky, right? So okay, things are terrible right now, but like the Messiah will come and he'll make things new, he'll make all things right and whatnot. And then the Messiah comes and he's seemingly destroyed by the forces of evil in this world, right? So Thomas is in that space. Okay, so we have no hope, I think, because the Messiah has died, right? But here's the thing, because he has a sense of woundedness, because it's his deep sense of pain in the aftermath of the death of the Messiah, he thinks that because my pain is so intense, therefore it reveals the ultimate truth of who I am and my situation in life. which leaves no room in his heart for any sort of competing truth or competing claim that would pull him away from the darkness and back into the light. And hopefully you can see how this relates to what we're talking about here, right? So in a particular moment where St. Thomas is just kind of inwardly focused and focused on his pain and his emotions and whatever, in a weird sort of way, he's being a relativist, right? It's the primacy of like my feelings, the primacy of my subjective experience. So even when the disciples are like, no, like the Messiah has come back from the dead, like he has no room in his heart to receive that because he listens to his pain as opposed to being open to the truth. And the point is, like, we do that all the time, right? But then to this other point about inhibiting freedom of speech, it's like you want to respect the experience of the Thomases in the world, but at the same time to get them to break out of that, right? Like the truth is not dictated by your experience of pain or woundedness, right? There's a bigger world than how you feel within your own heart, right? So anyways, fourth sort of difficulty with regards to relativism is kind of related to the freedom of speech thing, right? It kind of like prevents any sort of authentic relationship, because in the absence of truth that we can all access through, reason and the use of the intellect, there's just like my opinion and your opinion, and maybe there's your opinion which I don't like, and so I simply like tolerate your opinion. But to be brothers and sisters in Christ, it requires more than simply tolerating each other, right? It requires us to talk about things of ultimate concern. That's why, for example, when it comes to religion, like religion, for example, it can be often drained of its interest or value in terms of the human experience, because we often reduce religion to simply mere external, liturgical practice, for example, as opposed to realizing that religion at its best is about things of ultimate concern. Like, where am I from? Where am I going? What's my purpose in life? What's my meaning in life? How do things all fit together? Am I really part of something bigger than myself? When religion is approached at from that perspective, it's always exciting and it's always relevant. But what's happened is that in the culture of relativism, you can't talk about religion because it deals with things of ultimate meaning, and relativists don't believe in that. You also can't talk about politics because politics is like, how do I organize society in light of what I believe to be right or wrong, true or false, right? So what happens? We don't really talk about things that matter. And so you just talk about superficial stuff, like, who won the game last night or whatever. So so that's the point, right? So relativism can take away from the possibility of deep, authentic conversations and relationships where we can talk about these things, like talk about meaning and purpose and how best to structure my life and society to fulfill the deep desires of my heart, however you want to frame it. Okay. Fifth difficulty with relativism, it's incompatible with the faith. And again, logical, right? If religion is simply a matter of personal opinion, then God is simply a matter of personal opinion, which means that God isn't real. And so if God isn't real, then why would it matter, right? Like, why would I want to invest in my relationship with this thing which is simply a figment of my imagination? Or why would I want to go the way of discipleship? And discipleship obviously is just like total buy-in, right? I die to the old sinful self, commit myself to becoming another Christ in this world. But if Christ is simply a figment of my imagination, simply a variation of my personal preference, like chocolate or vanilla ice cream, then why would I invest of myself into this thing, right? So it's incompatible with real faith. The example that comes to mind, I don't know if this is like a perfect example, but this is what comes to mind. I remember talking to a friend of mine who was talking about abortion, right? And then he said, like, I believe in a woman's right to choose, right? So he was like pro-choice, if you will. But then what happened is that he got his girlfriend pregnant. And so, okay, now it's the way he framed it was like, okay, now it's not just a child, it's not just a baby, it's my baby, it's our baby, it's our child. And he's explaining to me, right? He's saying, well, the moment it became like my child and my baby, then I couldn't abort the child because it's my child, my baby. But I still leave it up to whatever different people to make their own choice. But you see, therein lies the point, right? Like, it's always someone's baby, it's always someone's child, right? So the idea there is that once things become an abstraction, then like I don't need to be personally invested in the thing because it's merely an idea, it's merely a concept. So it's just a baby. It's just like, this idea of God, or my personal opinion that Christ could be something which is real, but in reality, I believe it's a figment of my imagination, right? So truth matters. Okay. Sixth difficulty with regards to relativism it leads to a sense of despair. And hopefully you see all these things are connected, right? So the idea here is that, like, if I don't believe in truth, and therefore my life has no ultimate meaning, my life has no ultimate purpose, then what am I living for? What am I living for? It's, just this idea of minimizing pain, minimizing inconvenience, maximizing pleasure, or to put it more bluntly, just like, okay, what do I do? Like, I go through life and I'm living for the weekend. I'm just trying to, like, get through it and stuff. And then I look back on my life, and what was my life? I just did a couple fun things. I tried to kind of avoid landmines, which would make my life kind of uncomfortable. And then I died. And maybe on top of that, you believe that he who dies with the most toys wins. And so, like, I die having experienced a few different pleasures with a bunch of things in my bank account and a bunch of things in my possession. And, like, yeah, that was my life. And no one wants that to be their life. Like, really, deep down, no one really wants that to be their life. And so, but if you believe that, and if you're living your life according to that particular philosophy, those particular philosophies, those sacred philosophies, it can only lead to a certain discouragement and despair, right? Whereas in contrast, I want to say something from the Bible. So you notice that the Ten Commandments, they're actually listed twice in the Old Testament. I don't know if you realize that. So once in the book of Exodus and once in the book of Deuteronomy, right? And the only difference is the particular motivation given for the third commandment about observing the Sabbath day. So I always forget which one's which, right? But basically, I think the idea is that in the book of Deuteronomy, it says you want to observe the Sabbath day to offer thanks to God, who is the Redeemer. And so obviously what's being contemplated there is Israelite people being redeemed or liberated from slavery in Egypt, right? So you transpose that to a New Testament context, God liberating us from the tyranny of sin and death, right? And then the other one, the other book talks about how we're called to observe the Sabbath day to participate in the rest of the Creator God, who rested, of course, on the seventh day, right? So you pull all together, right? So I'm called to observe the Sabbath day out of respect for God, who is Creator and Redeemer. Now, how that applies to us, like, that the Sabbath day is the day that we're called to rest. But the beauty of those two passages in Exodus and Deuteronomy is that in order for me to fully participate in God's rest and find the rest that I'm looking for on the Sabbath day, it's not simply a matter of doing nothing. It's not simply a matter of doing nothing. Not unlike how, like, Pope Benedict, when he talks about silence, right? Like, he says silence is not the absence of noise in a otherwise empty room, right? It's like I don't limit my attention to that which the world finds to be important and valuable, right? Insofar as I still continue to cling to that, I'll never have interior silence, right? So similar thing with this, right? So you can arrive on Sunday or like Saturday night, however you want to frame it, and like not do stuff in a certain sense and still not feel rested by the end of the weekend. You only have the rest that God is wanting to give to you if you have clarity about God as creator and redeemer. So to take those things one at a time, right? So God is creator. Like, the reality is that God didn't just create the world billions of years ago and has since been an absentee landlord. It's a constant act of creation in a certain sense. So the way my old philosophy professor put it was like, if God blinks, like, we're done for, right? So practically speaking, what that means is that God is always carrying the day. God is always carrying the day. So, like, he's carrying the day, so I don't have to. God's a great protagonist in life, so I don't have to be a great protagonist in life. I can be this, like, really minor supporting character in the universe, right? Because God is the playwright and all these different things, right? He's the principal actor, like, he's carrying the day, right? And the other thing is clarity about God being Redeemer. So do I have clarity? Do I have confidence and conviction about the fact that Christ suffered and died for my sins and came back from the dead and therefore has conquered sin and death? If that's the case, then I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to pretend that I'm something I'm not. I could say, well, gosh, I'm a sinner in need of redemption, or I'm an imperfect human being. I'm a bag full of cats, however you want to put it, right? But that's okay because, I'm a loved sinner. I'm a redeemed sinner, and God loves me in my brokenness. He is both creator and redeemer, right? Now, the reason I bring this up is because, like, that's the Christian worldview in contrast to the relativist worldview, which would lead you to despair. So my life has meaning. My life has purpose. I'm a child of God. I'm held in the hands of the God who is both creator and redeemer. So I don't have to carry the day. My life has meaning. My life has purpose. I can be imperfect. It's all right. Nothing can separate from the love of Christ. And that's an instance, like incidentally speaking, of like how you're called to answer the negativity of relativism, not simply with like, that's wrong, don't believe in that, but like, here is the positive, attractive alternative that would pull you away from this space of despair. So it's just a great way to kind of argue the point. But that leads us to our kind of like final thing in a certain sense, keys to dialoguing with relativism, dialoguing about relativism. So we talked about the problems of relativism, but then like, what do you do when you're talking with people who believe in relativism? So I'm just going to walk you through these things one at a time. So first of all, you want to take an incremental approach. I mean, this applies across the board to any form of evangelization. You really want to take your time. I can't tell you how often, like I'm in the office here talking to staff, or we're just talking to the priest or whatever the case may be, about evangelization. And like the common mistake that everyone makes, including priests, is that they presume too much, or they jump ahead, or like they kind of want the person to be here, but they're actually like a little bit farther back, right? And it's not to get discouraged about that. It's just be realistic. Like, where is the person at? Where's the conversation at? And how can I move the thing along? So some of you heard me say this before, but like, I remember talking to my spiritual director back in the day, and he said, okay, like, let's say, Eric, you're meeting someone, and in your mind, they're at minus 50, and you want to bring them to plus 50. Like, your job is never to bring them from minus 50 to plus 50. Your job is to recognize, first of all, God is the great protagonist of life. The Holy Spirit brings about any sort of conversion in anyone's life, no matter how incremental. And so therefore, your job is to not even bring about conversion. Your job is to cooperate with God's grace, the work of the Holy Spirit, which precedes your presence and precedes your action, to help the person move not from minus 50 to plus 50, but from minus 50 to minus 49. And that's it. And that's it, you know, till the next conversation, which may or may not involve you. That's the thing, right? So that's why, like, I mean, recently, if you've been at the parish, usually I use a ton of movie analogies, but like lately I've been using like sports analogies, you know? So imagine like, you know, playing a hockey game, 3 periods and whatnot. Like the really elite hockey players in this world, they know you're only going to get a few chances. So you can have a whole whack of shots, but maybe a lot of them are from the perimeter, right? So, but in terms of like real quality scoring chances, especially if it's a tightly checked game in the playoffs and the stakes are high, like Western Conference Finals or whatever, you're only probably going to get like as a team, like maybe like 8 scoring chances, maybe less, maybe like 6. So that means if you're on the first line, maybe you get like 1 of those, maybe like 2 of those, which means over the course of a 60-minute game, like what's your window of opportunity? Maybe like a split second here and a split second there. But even in those moments, like if you have the patience and the wherewithal to kind of wait for those moments in the third period, late in the third period, it still involves people beyond yourself. So there's people on the team, there's the condition of the ice, and that sort of thing. So that's the way you want to look at evangelization. Like it's a practical implication of like, I'm part of something bigger than myself. I'm part of something bigger than myself. So you want to go for like a knockout punch, like right away in one go. It rarely is like that. A lot of times it's just like setting the table, you know, so I'm setting the table in the first period for what could be the case in the second period or the third period or whatever the case may be. And then even when that moment arrives, again, it's not just me. Like there's a reason why we kind of hang upon the theology of the mystical body of Christ. Like together, we try to move this thing along. Right? So second key to dialoguing with people about relativism, again, the whole affirmative orthodoxy thing, right? So to not pitch it like you're wrong, full stop, right? But like, here is the attractive alternative. And what that requires you to do is to really know your faith, to really know your faith. Like, so I think it was like Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, he talked about this, where he says you want to know your faith to the extent that, he uses a computer example, as well as an IT specialist knows the inside of a computer. You know, it's for all you techies out there, right? So that's what he says. And so to know it like that well, like I don't know anything about computers, I don't, right? But like, just to imagine the precision that he's talking about there, where like, okay, here's a topic, and I don't just know one way to explain it. I know like this way and that way, so I can be flexible in the moment, depending on the circumstance, depending on the person I'm dealing with, right? But more to the point, like when it comes to kind of presenting the alternative view based on our Catholic faith, you need to be able to present that stuff in a really attractive sort of way. To use an analogy, like I remember that when they were teaching us about confession in the seminary, the idea was that no matter what that person comes in with in terms of the sacrament confession, they must never leave the confessional feeling hopeless. They must never leave the confessional feeling discouraged. And they must never leave the confessional feeling like that wasn't like a gift that was received, because that's not the gospel. The gospel is like, okay, you come in and whatever the case may be, like wherever it is, wherever, like God is God of reality. He can handle anything, right? So whatever the situation is, God meets you in that, and we can show you or can bring you even incrementally to a greater sense of peace and freedom and all these different things, right? Now, I'll give you a couple examples of that, right? So one of my favorite passages in the entire gospel is Matthew chapter 11, right? Come to me, all who are weary and find life burdensome, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm meek and humble of heart. My yoke is easy and my burden is light, right? So what I want you to notice there is that with that particular passage, it's very much the instance of gift and task. So God wants to give you this thing, which is a tremendous gift. He wants to give you peace. Come to me, all who are weary and find life burdensome, right? But at the same time, there's a task. There's something you need to do to unlock the door, to unwrap the gift, right? So what you need to do is kind of interesting. You need to imitate the Lord's meekness. You need to imitate the Lord's humility, right? So humility, like, Bishop Barron talks about this. It's not about denying your gifts and talents. It's basically about not living in your head. So I don't live in the narrow space of my ego. I'm fully present to life, right? So I'm not caught up in my own ego and ambitions and concerns and comparing myself with other people. I'm just like fully present to the life that God gives to me as a pure gift, moment to moment, right? So that's humility. But the other thing too is meekness. So meekness is not being a shy wallflower, but this idea that whereas before I was all over the place, now I'm focused, now I'm disciplined, and now I have the conscious intention to only spend energy, time, however you want to frame it, according to God's particular purposes. So, think about Peter, Paul, St. Augustine, whatever, before pre-conversion, all over the place. But post-conversion, everything's focused, everything's disciplined, focused to God's particular end. And the idea is that when you imitate the Lord's meekness and humility, according to the gospel values, then you obtain his peace. Another way of saying it is that when you do that, when you imitate the Lord's meekness and humility, you realize in retrospect that it is only the Lord's yoke which is easy, and only his burden which is light, right? So another example of that, think about like sins versus speech, right? So, one could say like, don't gossip, don't slander other people. And like, okay, fine, right? But we're not called to like just not do stuff. We're called to do the affirmative thing. We're like, how do I transform the world in collaboration with God's grace according to his providential design? So maybe I'm very intentional with the gift of my speech to build people up, to encourage them, to speak the truth in love, however you want to frame it. Okay. Another key to kind of keep in mind with regards to dialogue about relativism, to expose the limits of scientism. So there's science, but there's also scientism, right, which are two different things. So basically, I'm presuming you know what science is, right? But scientism is a particular philosophy which holds that we only acknowledge the truth which is obtained through the scientific method. So I mentioned before about how people typically aren't relatives across the board. They tend to be relatives with regards, especially to morality and religion, right? But it's funny with like people who are scientists or people who believe in scientism, that's probably a better way to put it. They believe in truth, they believe in knowledge, but only truth and knowledge insofar as it is supported, if you will, by the scientific method. But as we kind of hinted before, there's a limit, right? Because mathematics, science, however you want to frame it, they have their particular areas of relevance, if you will. But at the same time, like, when it comes to like meaning and purpose and whatnot, science and math, they can't really reveal those things. But on top of that, you think about the truth that we can discover through arts or poetry or philosophy or literature, right? If you close yourself off to all that stuff and only reduce knowledge to what you can find through science and math, it's a limiting experience indeed, right? And people know this intuitively, right? So, example that always comes to mind, like on Valentine's Day, like there's a reason why you take the time to buy a nice card for your spouse with the poetry and whatnot, the pictures, and you write like, I love you, and sort of thing. Like you could simply write I love you on a napkin and give it to your loved one, in which case you'll probably get divorced. So what's behind that is people know that, okay, there's a certain value to, again, arts, philosophy, poetry, literature, right? It conveys a truth which it cannot be captured through simply the scientific method. Okay. Fourth key with regards to dialogue about relativism. Basically, you need to expose, this is a simple point, you need to expose the inherent contradiction contained within the philosophy of relativism itself. You need to expose the inherent contradiction contained within that particular philosophy, right? So you think it through, right? So relativism says that it is always true for everyone that there is nothing which is true. And so it's a contradiction. So just that kind of have that in your back pocket. Okay. The other thing you want to do, another key, is you want to make a clear distinction between judging the action and judging the person, which is no small thing. So there's this guy named Rick Warren. I think he's a Protestant pastor. He says, in modern society, there's basically two big lies. First of all, this idea that if you disagree with someone, necessarily you must either fear them or hate them. So that's the first big lie, right? So if you disagree with someone, necessarily you must fear them and or hate them. The second big lie is that if you love someone, you see where this is going, right? Second big lie in society is that if you love someone, you must necessarily agree with everything that they're doing, you know? This happened recently. There was an actress who won this award for her craft, right? She was an actress in a movie and she did really well. And then they rewarded her publicly by giving her this award. So some of you know who I'm talking about. So basically what happened, just to kind of paraphrase, in her acceptance speech when receiving this award, she brought up the issue of abortion. And what she said was that you basically are celebrating my work in this movie, my work as an actress. Therefore, you necessarily agree with all the choices I made to become a successful actress, including abortion, right? And it's like, no, that's not true. I just liked you in that movie, right? So again, it feeds into that, those two big lies that Rick Warren talks about, right? So there's that, right? So like one thing doesn't flow to the next. So just because I disagree with you, it doesn't mean I don't like you. Just because I love you, it doesn't mean I have to agree with everything that you do or everything that you say. So it's very important to kind of have it clear in the back of our minds, right? On top of that, you got to realize that there's a reason why we say speaking the truth in love or speaking the truth in charity. Sometimes you're required to preach the difficult truth to the people that you love. And in fact, if there is the absence of that, that is problematic. I think it might even be in the role of St. Benedict, where a healthy quality of people living in community is that there is the opportunity and the receipt of fraternal correction on a regular basis, right? Now, I mean, you want to qualify that in a certain sense, right? So I remember back in the day, I took this, I went to this conference in the States, and one of the priests was talking about Jesus, how he did this, right? And so he said, you know, it's interesting when you look at the gospel, like how much like eating the Lord does. Like he eats a lot, right? And so he's always eating with these disciples. And the idea is that it seems like he's wasting time with them, but what he's actually doing is that he's giving them time and attention, showing them therefore that he loves them, building this, like setting the table, if you will, for a conversation which could take place in the future, right? So the idea is that like he knows eventually he's going to get to substantive things where like, okay, this is the cost of discipleship. This is the Our Father, or you know, you've heard this, but I say to you that, like challenging truths, right? But he sets the table for them to receive the difficult truth by spending copious amounts of time with them, by giving a ton of attention to them, right? So after a while, they believe in his love and they believe in the relationship, whereas they will receive the difficult truth from him, whereas they might not receive it from another person, right? But so that's the pedagogy, if you will, of Jesus Christ, right? So he doesn't just go in there and say like, you know what, you guys are doing all these things wrong. Again, what do you want? What are you looking for? Where are you hurt? What can I do for you? You know, and then time and attention. And then later on, okay, here's the cost of discipleship. So it's just very smart, right? Another example that comes to mind in terms of like judging the action, judging the person, and the whole idea of fraternal correction. I remember back in the day, obviously it's before seminary, but like I was dating this girl and we went on like one kind of like pseudo date type thing, right? And then partway through, she was saying like, oh, like my mom is like the coolest. Like I could be doing like anything with some guy next to her and she'd be like totally fine with it. And I remember thinking two things at that moment. First of all, your mom doesn't love you. But secondly, I'm pretty sure this is our last date. So just one of those things. Anyways, so judging the action, judging the person, make that distinction. All right. Third key to dialogue with people about relativism, to have it clear in the back of your mind the notion of what freedom actually is in the biblical imagination. And this is at the root of a lot of fierce objection when it comes to people trying to object to relativism. Like, so relativists, they believe on some level that if you compromise my ability to do whatever I want whenever I feel like it at any time, that is seen as a threat to my own happiness. Because they bought into this lie taught to us by the world that happiness depends on unmitigated freedom in a sense of freedom from, right? So that's the modern mentality. Happiness is tied to an unmitigated sense of freedom from any sort of constraint which would prevent me from doing whatever I want, whenever I feel like it, right? Whereas the Christian mentality, it's kind of interesting. It's both, right? So it's freedom from. So certainly there are things which are holding us back. So you think about like, fear or woundedness or like whatever, a bunch of things hold us back from being our true selves. But more to the point, on top of that, freedom for. Life has meaning. Life has purpose. So the analogy that is often used in Catholic circles is like playing the piano, right? So some people might say, well, you can't tell me how to play the piano. I'm just going to pound the keys however I want, and therefore I'm free. Whereas in the Christian mentality, it's like, okay, freedom from, freedom for, right? So in order for me to be fully free when I play the piano, I need to apply the discipline to learn what all these notes are all about. I need to practice scales. I need to practice chords, right? I need to apply myself to the craft. And yeah, it might require a certain amount of time and discipline, but the idea is that eventually in time, I will gain a certain proficiency when it comes to this instrument called the piano, such that I can play any song that I want, and I can play the song that I was meant to play. And therein lies authentic freedom. And same thing with us, right? In terms of like your life, the human person, morality, philosophy, theology, whatever, like there's a true and a false, a right and a wrong, and like the better or worse, and meaning and purpose, right? So does it take a while to kind of discover like what is the actual good? And then how do I correspond to it? Yeah, for real, right? But eventually you get to this point where like, you're in circumstances, I recognize the good without thinking about it. I know how to do it with minimal effort, right? So it just happens, which of course is the basis of virtue, right? There's a reason why virtue is based on that word habit, right? So it's not like you get up in the morning, oh my gosh, I gotta like brush all my teeth and wash my entire face. Like you just do it. Like you recognize the good easily without effort, and you correspond to the good again easily without effort. And right there, that's the sweet spot. Okay. Seventh key, gradualism. You got to have a proper notion of gradualism. And we touched on this in a certain sense before, right? But the thing I want to impress upon you here with regards to gradualism is that people often misunderstand this concept. So they know that gradualism in a certain sense is like meet people where they're at. And that's true. That's true, right? Very important part of catechesis, evangelization, this person that I'm trying to help move along the path of grace, however you want to frame it. Where are they in the spectrum of grace? And then I'm committed to meet them where they're at. At the same time, gradualism, this is the part that people forget, it also involves mutual commitment. So I meet you where you're at, but I am fully committed to journey with you to help you become the person that God is calling you to be. And you got to be committed too. I can't drag you to the well and force you to drink it. Like you got to want it too, right? So to go back to that St. Thomas example, right? So here's this guy like wounded and hurting, right? And the Lord knows that. And that's why that there's a beautiful part in the gospel, right? Where like, okay, so Thomas is like, unless I can see the mark of the nails and put my finger in the mark and my hand in the side, I will not believe. And the Lord, like he meets him where he's at. Like, Thomas, see the mark. Put your finger here. Put your hand in my side. Do not doubt, but only believe. So he knows that Thomas doesn't lack goodwill. He knows that he loves him, right? There's a reason why he's mourning the death of the Messiah, kind of like mourn in a certain sense than your typical guy. He was really close to Jesus, very much in love with Jesus. His difficulty is that he's trusting his pain more than the truth, which would set him free, right? That's his problem. The Lord sees that. He meets him where he's at, but then journeys with him to complete healing. So that's the Lord. Eighth key, to kind of move past the notion of tolerance. So basically, that's the thing with relativism. It reduces relationships, as we talked about before, to simply situations where, like, I tolerate your view, you tolerate my view, I tolerate your opinion, you tolerate my opinion. So we simply tolerate each other. And to have the mindset like, okay, I and we are trying to move past that. Because again, the truth matters and it will make your life better. Again, it's not the most perfect example, but like I think about how, like, people will say, for example, like, I want to wait till my kids get older so they can decide whether or not to go to mass or even be Catholic, even though they're baptized, which is kind of weird. But I always kind of say to people, if they give me a chance, like, well, imagine you say that to your kid with regards to like vegetables. Like, no, I don't want to eat my vegetables, mommy or daddy. And it's like, okay, well, I'll wait till you're 20 and then you can decide. Like, the kid will die in the meantime, right? And so when we say things with regards to religion in that way, like, okay, well, I'll let you decide when you're older, it kind of betrays in a certain sense our lack of conviction in the truth of that thing, or on a more basic level, the value of that thing, right? So if I don't believe that God is meant to be the center of my life, and I don't see on top of that the substantial good which obtains when I put Christ at the center of my life, then yeah, my efforts at evangelization will be really weak and almost bordering on pathetic, right? Because what am I selling people? I'm selling people on something that I don't believe in myself, right? So that's obviously a problem. Ninth key, to recover a proper sense of arguments as opposed to argumentation. Now, this is something which is often overlooked, right? Like as I mentioned at the outset, I used to be a lawyer, right? And I often tell people like, oh, I really love argument. And oftentimes people will say to me like, well, that's weird because you don't seem like a jerk, That's what they're thinking is argumentation. And you want to make that distinction, right? So we're talking about arguments, not argumentation. Argumentation is like, I'm trying to win the argument by like talking louder or like pounding my fist on something or like whatever, right? Whereas argument is a very specific thing where it's just like, okay, there's clear terms, there are premises which I use and like sound logic which lead to a particular conclusion. And so when I'm presenting an argument, like that's what I'm doing, right? So classic example, like think about the philosopher Socrates. Socrates is a man. All men are human, therefore Socrates is human. So that's an argument, right? So premise, logic, conclusion. If you want to debunk that particular argument, you either got to question the terms that are used, question the premise, or question the logic, as opposed to simply speaking louder or talking over the person or interrupting or engaging in character attacks. And now the reason I bring this up is because like you gotta receive it well, right? Because it's one thing to talk about relativism and oh, it's so wicked and drains life of meaning and purpose and stuff. But like if you're arguing against relativism, but you yourself are living out of the stance habitually of argumentation as opposed to argument, it shows that you're not really buying what you're selling, right? So if you are still not in that space where like I'm trying to win the arguments by yelling louder or character attacks or pounding the table or whatever, anything less than like actual argument, you need to work on that almost in a certain sense before you go out and try to convert people's hearts with regards to this particular philosophy. One final thing, you got to recognize that this is from the writings of Dr. Edward Shree. Again, it's kind of like, okay, where are people coming from, right? In the vast majority of cases, when people are holding firm to relativism, they're hiding behind a lack of integrity in their life. They're hiding behind a lack of integrity in their life, right? So there's this idea of cognitive dissonance, right? So an inconsistency between what I believe and how I'm actually acting, right? So the idea is that the human heart can only sustain contradiction for so long. Eventually, something's got to give. Either I change my actions or I change my belief system to fit how I'm actually acting. You can't live with inconsistency for very long. The human heart, again, can only take so much. So how that translates is that a lot of times people advocate fiercely in favor of relativism, personal opinion, there's no absolute truth, whatever. And you could debate with them on like the merits of the thing, but deep down, you want to rationalize the fact that, it's okay to sleep with my girlfriend outside of marriage. And that's like really the issue, right? Now, how that works for us, practically speaking, like you got to be somehow attentive to that. Because otherwise you're talking with someone on an abstract level, whereas their point of resistance has nothing to do with what you're arguing about, it has something to do with something else, right? So I'll give you one final example. I'll conclude with this. This happens a lot. Like priests are invited a lot by parents to like come have dinner or lunch with my borderline atheist son or daughter. And over the course of this meal, you will convert them back to the Catholic faith. So it doesn't happen so much anymore, but like it used to happen all the time, especially when I was an associate pastor. And I remember going out actually with some kids, and they were talking about the third eye and stuff, and things like the Crusades or however you want to put it. So like pointing to these things and suggesting that the reason why I'm not a full-fledged Catholic is because I don't understand the third eye, or there's this historical point of tension in terms of like Catholic history. But luckily, I kind of knew these guys, and it's like, no, like the reason why you're not accepting this thing is because when you were young, you were bullied, and in order to cope with that, when you got older, you joined a gang. This whole like herd mentality, which will protect us, right? So rather than dealing with your sense of inadequacy and whatever in a mature sort of way, you just joined a bunch of tough guys, right? And now your parents are trying to pitch to you Christianity, which in your mind seems weak, and it also seems like fake. It doesn't seem real. It seems like personal opinion. And so your point of resistance is, why would I give up this thing which seems to make me strong in favor of something which may or may not be true? That was really their point of concern. So basically their concern was, I don't want to gamble my life on something which could be a lie, right? Now we could spend a whole hour like talking about how to deal with that particular scenario, but I tell you that story because like, okay, like that sort of thing happens all the time. And you don't want to be caught up in a situation where like you're talking for a half hour about the third eye or the Crusades, whereas like it has nothing to do with that. There's actually something else going on, which is really the issue. You get to know the person, you identify the issue, you deal with that, and then there's a possibility to talk about kind of like more abstract things. Okay. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Father Eric, for that. Wow, just really thorough whirlwind presentation with lots of keys, I think, to unlock the problem, the philosophical, the theological problems that underpin relativism. So I will get right into it. People have already been posting on the question portal. Some of them you answered in your talk, so I'll try not to ask ones. I know there was a popular one surrounding how we can refute moral relativism in a Christian and loving way. So I really liked different principles you evoked, like gradualism, and just the charity to not presume where someone is and to allow for the primacy of the Holy Spirit in guiding that process. So getting to the other questions, this one sounds like it's philosophical. It has 3 votes now. So the question is, how can you address partial relativism where interpersonal morality can be absolute, but personal morality can be relative since it only affects me? And I think the person is getting or hinting at this idea that maybe objective morality would be okay if it were a moral situation where others are involved, but subjective or relativistic thought seems to be invoked if the decision only affects me.
Yeah, a couple of things with that. Like, first of all, like truth matters, you know? So like, is this decision that I'm making, is it actually good for me or is it bad for me? And the other part too, is this something that we often discount, but you know, we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And the thing I'm trying to like attack or address in a certain sense throughout the course of the talk is these aren't just like slogans, right? So when we talk about the mystical body of Christ, like what I do affects other people, good or bad, you know? And so I think it was Dr. Edward Shree, he talks about this in terms of like ships. Imagine a bunch of ships kind of going from one location to a different destination. And if one ship is all wonky, it's going to affect the other ships, right? In terms of their own kind of trajectory. Similar thing with us, right? So the example that comes to mind from the gospel is like when Joseph realizes that Mary is pregnant, and obviously not by him. And then like he makes a decision to send her away quietly, and then he goes to kind of sleep on it. And you remember what the angel says, like you got to capture the whole thing, right? So it's like, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. The child conceived from her from the Holy Spirit. You'll name him Jesus, and he will save people from their sins, right? So you read between the lines, the idea is that, okay, here's this thing which seems like difficult and seems challenging, but it's from God, right? And insofar as you accept it with the entirety of your being, salvation is brought not just to yourself and your family, but the whole world. And that's the thing that people tend to forget. Now, it's a variation of the problem of evil, though, right? So, like, we know as a principle, or a position of Catholic philosophy, that if any sort of evil exists in this world, it's because God permits it to bring about a greater good. Okay, fine, right? But to realize it goes beyond what I can see and comprehend and even touch. So it's almost a variation of like, it's almost like a baptized version of the butterfly effect, right? So butterfly, you know, beats his wings on one side of the continent, and the other side, like, you know, there's a tidal wave or something like that, right? So you just don't know, right? And so what it means for us, practically speaking, is that there's no such thing as private sin, but at the same time, there's no such thing as private virtue too. So you might think to yourself, well, okay, it doesn't matter whether or not I say yes to God in this particular moment, but it totally does, not just for you, but for the world.
Thank you. That's a good analogy. Yeah. How our virtue and vice naturally affects others and their salvation too. And the next question that we'll move to, I know that you touched on relativism and its social implications, cultural implications, but this question is addressing how relativism can seem very appealing, mostly because it is under the guise of striving for inclusiveness or inclusivity. It can be especially true when we're speaking about cultural inclusivity or the need for Christians to be exclusive. So is there a balance that can be found for Christians who I think are trying to maintain the principle of inclusivity, but reject relativism?
It's to kind of realize that the church is it's more not less, and so like the example that comes to mind, it's like Pentecost, where like the Holy Spirit descends, tongues of fire, and this sort of thing, and the apostles, they speak in a way which is comprehensible to everyone, but in their own language. And so it shows us, okay, like, what is the church? Radical unity, radical diversity, and it's both, right? But then what happens is that people tend to forget. So, we talked before about like, it's one thing to kind of preach against relativism, but then like, how am I living my own life? Do I live according to argumentation as opposed to being argumentative, or however you want to frame it, right? Similar thing with this. So when it comes to, my own life, do I believe fully in unity and diversity in the church, how both need to be kind of existing in tension, and both make the church what it's meant to be and more authentically beautiful? So how that plays out for us is that sometimes we're in situations where it's like, okay, I know that this is how I live my faith, but then do I recognize that God is doing something really special in that person's life who's like also involved in the parish, whatever, but is simply different from me? Or do I feel threatened by that difference? But at the same time, the flip side of it is like, okay, there is one true church. Like I remember, for example, like I did my field placement at a hospital, and the chaplain there was a Protestant minister, and he was saying like, gosh, like there's like all these different like lay movements in the Catholic Church, and like why are they criticizing us for like all these like splinter movements within the Protestant Reformation, right? So I thought, isn't that kind of a strike in our favor as opposed to yours? Like there's room for everybody in the Catholic Church, right? But at the same time, in a certain sense, that's almost a different issue than the idea of relativism, because it's like things can be true, but at the same time, there's the diversity within the truth. So it's almost like a diamond. Like you think about the development of doctrine, like the diamond remains the same, right? But as it's being turned in the light over the centuries, people discover new beauty and luminosity in that same diamond. Or like, love is patient, love is kind, like love is all these different things. Faith is this one thing in terms of like, letters to the Hebrews, substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So faith is this, right? But love is like this, and necessarily so, right? Mystical body of Christ all over again.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, the room for variation and diversity, but not embracing relativism in the process. So the next question is, I think these two, I'm going to combine two that are interrelated. And I know, again, that you did try to give us a lot of tools to walk with people who may be espousing relativist beliefs. But this question is about, what are some things that we can do to help our families and communities, and especially close friends or family, resist this tide that has buried itself so deeply into collective subconscious, into culture, and even into educational curriculum?
Yeah. I think to always go back to like, why do people ascribe to the philosophy? There's a certain attraction to everything, and to not demonize people or their positions, right? So it's very much what Jordan Peterson talks about, right? So it's not the straw man approach where like you create the weakest position, the opposing position, but what's like the strong man position? Like what's the strongest version of what they're presenting, right? So to go back to what we talked about, so like relativism, like what's behind that? A lot of times this idea that I've fed into this belief, which is pervasive in the culture, that unless I have all my options open, unless I have unrestricted freedom, in a sense of like freedom from purely, then that's an undue compromise of my sense of happiness, right? But to be able to pitch the opposing view in a way which is attractive, like to lead people to where they're actually kind of dying to go, right? Even Friedrich Nietzsche realized this, right? So he talked about this in terms of like a boat, so you can say like, hey, like I'm free, I'm away from the dock. But then he goes, eventually you're just like floating in the middle of an ocean and there's nowhere to dock, you're just there. And he goes, and that's terrible, but whatever, you get over it, right? But it's like, no, but like is that really what you want, right? So a lot of people, I would say, tie into this idea of like meaning and purpose and whatever. But more importantly, I guess, in a certain sense, in terms of efforts to evangelize, this is why it's important to realize that, like, where the church is in dire need of witnesses as opposed to people who can simply speak the truth, right? The radiance of the gospel needs to show through your very person and through your lived out experience, right? And so basically people need to see within you, not just that you're happy and free and peaceful, but that's a direct consequence of you living the life of discipleship and living according to gospel values. If you don't have that, and then you try to convince people, oh no, like this will leave you more free and happy, like it's not convincing. It just isn't, And so that's why we're talking about different things. Like, okay, like if you're not actually engaging in argument, for example, you're simply being argumentative, but then you say like, oh, by the way, don't believe in relativism, like it's not convincing, right? Or if you're trying to demonize the other person or the position without realizing like kind of where they're coming from, like the thing I talked about at the very end with like those kids at the dinner, right? Like you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. But that's why it requires a certain creativity. That's why like when people come into priests and they say like, well, yeah, I know you don't know me, but I'm describing loosely my situation involving this family member or these kids or whatever. What should I do? And it's like, well, in a certain sense, I don't know. Like here are some principles you can observe. And in this particular time, maybe you could try this, but then circumstances might change, and then you try this other thing, whatever, right? But yeah, that's why I'm trying to say things in terms of principles and keys and whatnot. So hopefully you get a chance to kind of look back at it later on and just see how does this apply to my concrete circumstance.
Okay, great. That helped. And the next question, it's a bit of a political question and philosophical, related to the contradictions that are inherent within people who are relativists. So the question is that there are leftist social justice types, this could be politicians or parties, that at times seem to hold objectivist ideals and notions such as equal rights for all people. And they espouse these ideas, but at other times, the same political parties or groups would probably be very subjectivist when it comes to imposing a moral view, or an ethical framework on how people in society should live or how those rights should even be distributed. So any thoughts on that?
It's kind of the thing we talked about at the outset, where like people usually aren't relativists across the board, but they're usually selective in their relativism. So that in itself is a really important thing to pick up on, and maybe to bring up in conversation when you're dialoguing with people. Because most people like to believe that they're reasonable and then they have a sort of a logical consistency in terms of their lived out worldview. And we can kind of point out in a charitable way that that's not necessarily the case. That can be really good. Now, when I talked about the thing before about the -50, -49 thing, like how that plays out practically speaking, like you never want to embarrass people to win an argument. That's never helpful, right? But if you can kind of bring people to the point where like, okay, before I realized that you thought you had a complete integral understanding with regards to this issue, but now I'm saying something to kind of crack that open just a little bit, again, till the next conversation, that's like super helpful, right? So it might not seem like a complete win, but it's actually a major victory in terms of like setting up the table for a future conversation. So even something like that, where like point out to the person you're not a relativist across the board, but again, with charity and stuff like that, that can be quite helpful. Because basically it's an invitation to live with integrity, which everyone wants.
So the next question is, I think it's more of a personal, you gave him a really good list of examples, but it's just asking out of personal curiosity. Did you have any tips or examples in your experience with dealing with relativist colleagues in the field of law or business? And how did you handle that?
I worked as a lawyer like full time for a couple of years before I entered seminary. And then I worked in the summers a little bit. So there were opportunities to have conversations here and there, but like it was one of those things where I had to kind of wait for the opportunity. So like a lot of times people would kind of talk to me on the fly, or like, hey, can we have coffee after the workday and whatnot. But something I really learned from those situations is that you really gotta know your stuff, you know? You really gotta like read a lot of things too. Like it's funny how like, you talk to people and it's just like, okay, how do I evangelize my coworkers, my family and stuff? And it's just like, you know what you should do right now is just like study a lot, like a lot, you know? And then people will be like, oh no, I don't like reading. It's like, yeah, you gotta get over that. So like you gotta like read a ton, listen to podcasts, talk to people. And then like what happens is that you build up a whole wealth of like, not just knowledge, but like different ways to explain the same topic from different angles depending on the situation. And that's the thing that's like super, super helpful, right? Now for myself in the law firm, like talk about not skipping steps and stuff, gradualism and meeting people where they're at. Something I would think about all the time is like a lot of these people, they weren't even Catholic. And so for all intents and purposes, like I represented the Catholic Church for them. right? And they knew I was studying for the priesthood, especially in those summers while I was working back in the last law firm I was at, right? And so every interaction, whether we're talking about like explicitly about religion or we're talking about like football or something like that, like to have them come away from that experience with like, yeah, like that was really great. Like, wow, he's really attentive to me. Or he was real, I felt like he was really hearing where I was coming from, or like he really cared about me, about what was going on in my life and stuff like that. Like setting the table, setting the table. And it might sound like a cop out, but like that was like really, really important because it was just like waiting for opportunities and like, okay, God, what do you call me to do in this particular circumstance? And a lot of times it was stuff like that. And occasionally there'll be opportunities to move the situation along in a philosophical or a more kind of concrete way in terms of the concepts, right? But a lot of it was just, yeah, a lot of it was just kind of like witnessing to the faith in terms of how I lived and setting the table for future conversations.
I smiled when you said that you got to get over the not studying, because I'm imagining a university student saying they want to get a degree, but they don't like reading. So,
Yeah.
and that would be very difficult for sure. So this one, oh, this is an interesting one. I think it's drawing on some philosophy, some scripture. The question is, in your opinion, when Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Jesus was silent, as we know. Do you think he was silent because he didn't want to get into relativism? Or was he sensing that no amount of words could explain truth to this Roman?
If you follow the that particular text, like it's especially in the gospel, like movement is really important, right? So it's not just what people say, but like how are they moving? And so you notice, for example, when someone's healed before they're going in the wrong direction, but now they can follow Christ in the mode of discipleship, right? So in the story of Pontius Pilate, it's a particular thing, so that he's going in and out of the praetorium, right? So he goes out, he comes in, and this and that, dialoguing with like the people and this and whatever. And what that implies, in combination with the actual words in the narrative, is that like he has internal conflict. And then what happens at the very end, remember he has that thing where he's just like, this is the king of the Jews in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. And someone says, oh, well, you should say like this man said. And he goes, well, what I have written, what I've written. And that is basically almost a flat out admission, like, yeah, like I knew he was the king of the Jews. I knew it, right? But I washed my hands of it and I said, oh no, it was because of my superiors. It was because of the crowd. Like the pressure was immense. But no, like, dude, like the choice was always yours, right? And the Lord knows that, right? So that's when he's dialoguing with him. It's just like, hey, are you a king? Or is this question come for yourself, or do people tell you this, right? So like, you read between the lines, like the Lord knows, right? So, and when it gets to that point, like, what is truth? Even when Pilate says that, you read between the lines, it's like it's a rhetorical question. So he's not really inviting an answer from the Lord. So, yeah, but he knows.
That is a really great observation with the movement depicting the internal state that of conflict that he's in. So lots to consider. I know, so this one is definitely just more context specific, though this topic is on how to have conversations with relativists in general. This one is asking, do you have particular tips on how to have conversations about the truth of sexual inclusivity? And I think particularly all those who want to normalize things other than heterosexuality.
Yeah, it's another example of like first things first, So I've been at St. Joseph's Worker Parish, my current parish, for like 6 years, and one of the advantages of knowing you're in a place for 6 years as opposed to being associate pastor is that you're there for 6 years, right? And associate pastor, you can be out like after like a year, 2 years, whatever, right? And so you have a chance to kind of build deliberately. And so I remember my old internship pastor, Monsignor Sheehy, like he talked about when he was at Blessed Trinity Parish, and he was there for like 10 years or something. And he said, Eric, I had a 3-step plan. Like I wanted people to believe in God, think about God, then love God. That's what it was. And he says, I've been here for a while, and I think they're slowly starting to think about God now. And he was there for like years, And this was like obviously like a seasoned priest, this sort of thing. And I always remember that. And so kind of a similar thing with this, right? So like when I'm talking to people, right? Like in order to kind of understand the church's position with regards to same-sex marriage or whatever the case may be, you need to understand the church's position on chastity. And you need to be living chastity yourself, right? So like all that stuff, because if you talk about these things in the abstract or isolated from the contextual whole, it's hard. It's hard to kind of convince people of that, right? And then even with that, like, okay, so to go back to the Monsignor Sheehy example, right? Like, you can talk about love of God. The people, it doesn't cross their mind to think about God, or they don't believe in God. And what are you doing? You know, it's not to say talking about love of God is not useful, right? But like, you skipped a step there. In that case, you skipped 2 steps, right? So same thing with this, right? So when you're dialoguing with people about like fine-tuned issues with regards to chastity, like, do they even know what chastity is? Do they understand the value of chastity? Do you understand the value of chastity? And are you able to pitch it from that perspective? So
Definitely good principles with the first things first and backtrack the argument to terms you both understand. Yeah. And I think we'll keep this as the last one. Definitely answered a good list here of varied questions. But this question is just about, in light of what you said about reading and studying and really knowing our stuff well, are there any books or resources that you could recommend to increase our knowledge base in this area?
well, when it comes to spiritual reading in general, this is something that's not really stated that much, right? But like, it's good to have obviously devotional books and whatnot, but it's funny how often people will begin a spiritual reading program, like obviously reading books by the saints or Catholic authors, and they'll like jump into like, oh, I'll just, you know, read this thing about some dark night of the soul, or I'll read this thing about discerning my vocation, whatever. Whereas like, you should probably read the catechism. You know, but like no one wants to read the catechism because it seems like so boring or whatever. But like, the catechism is like, it's it, right? Like, it is like the best source in terms of learning about our faith. And it covers a whole wealth of stuff that you just probably wouldn't necessarily expect. I know everyone I recommend to actually read a catechism of the Catholic Church who have actually done it. Like, yeah, their lives are completely changed, you know? But every time I'm always shocked that they actually did it because so few people do it, you know? I'll give you an example. Like, when I was, again, teaching RCI in my first parish, we had this thing where like people would obviously take the program as like, you know, neophytes and whatnot. And one guy, well, multiple people did this, but they would like the course so much they'd take it again. But one guy took it like 3 times. And at the end of it, like, he could explain things better than the catechists who have been Catholics their whole life. And I asked him, like, how are you able to do that? And he goes, well, I just read the catechism. I just read the notes and whatever, and just did it like 3 reps, and then like, bang, got it, you know? And so it's another variation of like you can't skip that step too, right? Because everyone wants to get out there and evangelize and spread the good news, but like man, like, you really gotta know your stuff, right? And if you say something which is like slightly off, or you miss an opportunity because you just didn't know enough, like, that's not good, you know? But fortunately, we live in the information age, and like, there's a lot of great stuff out there. But again, like, more to the point, the thing which is often overlooked is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's just absolutely amazing. So highly recommended.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And yeah, sometimes it can be just as daunting as telling people to get through all of scripture, right? But it's so worth reading in its entirety for all the wisdom it contains. So with that, I think that we've more or less wrapped up the Q&A. I want to thank everyone who asked a question or who was benefited by listening to the questions. And I just want to thank everyone for making this event such a success and for showing such a keen interest. I do commend you, because by even being here, you clearly showed that you want to learn, right? And you want to know more about this topic and how to apply it to your faith. And I wanted to give a big thank you to Father Eric Ma. Thank you for gracing us with your time, your wisdom, your philosophical insights, and just the practical reason that you threw in to help us see how these examples crop up in the lives of our family members and friends and in our own daily lives. So we're just grateful to be able to have everything that you presented to take into our life going forward. And we actually wish you well, Father Eric, since Father Eric announced on the Catholic Latte podcast that he is going to be leaving St. Joseph the Worker. I'm sure the parish and the chaplaincy will greatly miss you. So we wanted to give you a very big thank you and ask if you could give us a final blessing to end.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks again, Erica and Father Hansu, for the invitation. It's just great to speak to a whole different crowd of people and stuff. So yeah, thanks again for the opportunity. So, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world end. Amen. The Lord be with you. May I take God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, go in peace, and have a good night.
Thank you, Father Eric, and thank you all for joining. Have a good night. We will be sending the recording via email to all those who registered. I know some couldn't make it. And Father Eric, I think, will be putting a version of the recording on the Catholic Latte podcast. So tune into that. I'll give you a list in your emails about how to subscribe to that podcast.